There was a time when Kratos was everything wrong with video game protagonists. He was loud and angry, a storm in human skin, ripping through gods and monsters with rage polished into spectacle. A demigod with a blood soaked past and no desire to confront it. His story wasn't about growth, it was more about destruction. And for a while, that was enough. We were sold on his power, on the size of his enemies, on the way he screamed every time he lost control. Kratos wasn't a character, he was just a weapon. And the Greek saga knew that. It leaned into it, stylized his wrath into something operatic. You didn't have to understand him, you just had to keep moving forward. But something changed. Not just in the world, but in the man. God of War 2018 didn't just reboot the franchise, it resurrected it. It took the myth of Kratos and did one thing we never expected. It made him quiet. The first time we see him again, he's not in chains. He's not climbing Olympus. He's standing in the woods with an axe, and a silence that says more than any roar ever did. His wife has died, his son is watching, and the god who once slaughtered a pantheon doesn't scream. He just breathes. And from the first breath, that arc begins. Not just of a man, but a man who is terrified of who he used to be. Terrified that it might still live inside him. Terrified that his son might one day understand what kind of man is teaching him how to survive. Kratos doesn't begin his story as a mentor. He begins it as a warning. And that's where everything about his arc becomes more than just mythology. It becomes human. Kratos doesn't know how to raise a son. He knows how to survive, how to kill, and how to bury the past deep enough that it stops clawing at his skin. But love, nurturing, vulnerability, these things were never given to him. And now, as a father, he has nothing to draw from but restraint. And even that, especially that, is a war inside his chest. Atreus doesn't see it at first. He sees the surface. A distant father, always watching, rarely speaking, a man made of orders and withheld affection. But we see more. We see the effort, the pause before every word, the way Kratos turns his head slightly before offering advice, as if checking to make sure the rage that lives inside him isn't going to leak out through his mouth. Because that rage, his old self, it's still there, coiled in his bones like a curse. The ghost of Sparta didn't die with the Greek pantheon, he just went quiet. And now, as Atreus grows stronger, more curious and more confident, Kratos sees something forming that he can't ignore. A reflection. Not a copy, not yet, but the potential for the same mistakes, the same hunger, the same heat behind the eyes. And Kratos, for all his strength, for all the monsters he's killed and gods he's defied, suddenly feels powerless. Because this is a threat he can't fight. He can't outmuscle the pain he's passed down. He can't chain the trauma that he shaped. All he can do is try. And the tragedy, the weight, is that he doesn't believe trying is enough. That he's already poisoned the well by being simply who he is. That's why every interaction with Atreus feels so fragile. Why the silence is so heavy. Kratos isn't withholding love. He's terrified that if he opens the door to it, it'll come out mangled, contaminated. That the same hand that held a child once before and failed to protect her might fail again. And so instead, he teaches, through caution and through boundaries, through discipline masked as survival. And it's easy at first to see this as cold, to say he should smile more, laugh more, hug the boy. But Kratos isn't building a warrior. He's guarding a soul, with walls and with silence, with everything he never got. Because he's not just a god anymore, he's a father. And fatherhood for Kratos is not a calling, it's a reckoning. There's a moment, small, quiet, almost easy to miss, when Atreus kills for the first time, and it shakes him like it should. Not with horror, not with regret, but with excitement. He looks at his hands like they're no longer his. like they've awakened something. And for a second, you see it in his face. The dangerous glint of pride. The thing Kratos knows all too well. The thing he's been desperate to keep buried. And Kratos doesn't comfort him. He doesn't kneel down, doesn't offer a lesson about responsibility or sorrow. He snaps. He tells Atreus to control it, to bury it, to be better than that. Because in that moment, Kratos doesn't see his son. He sees himself. And that's when the arc truly begins to fracture. Not in a clean narrative sense, but in an emotional one. Because Kratos realizes he's not raising Atreus in isolation. He's not giving him tools to shape his own identity. He's reacting, trying to contain him, shape him, steer him away from the person Kratos used to be. But he can't, because Atreus isn't just watching, he's learning. And kids don't listen to what you say. They absorb what you do. And Kratos, for all his wisdom, for all his restraint, is built from blood and fire. His past doesn't follow him, it leads him. It's in the way he fights, in the way he holds the axe like a limb, in the way his face stays calm when monsters come close, but trembles when his son asks why he never talks about his mother. Kratos is a man made entirely of instinct and aftermath, and Atreus is beginning to reflect that. The game doesn't rush this, it lets you feel it, in the slow breakdown of their connection. Atreus grows cocky, angry, dismissive. He lashes out. He kills with less hesitation, and every time he does, Kratos pulls further back. Not because he's angry, but because he doesn't know if it's already too late. That's the tragedy. That's the fear. Not that Atreus will become a monster, but that he already is one, and Kratos handed him the tools to do it. So he stops lecturing and starts watching, starts remembering what he did to his father, what his father did to him, and what might be coming if he doesn't speak, really speak, before the cycle repeats again. Because that's what's at stake now. Not a prophecy, not a war. A boy, a mirror, and a man who's afraid to look into it. Kratos never learned how to be soft. Not in Sparta, not on Olympus, not during all the years spent dragging vengeance behind him like a broken blade. Every lesson carved into his skin came from war, loss, betrayal. He loved once, deeply, but what came after wasn't peace, it was ash. So when he sees Atreus starting to fracture, start to twist under the weight of his own strength, Kratos knows what the world will do to a boy who doesn't learn how to carry his power with grace. He also knows what it feels like to have no one to teach you that. And slowly, painfully, he begins to speak again. Not too often, not eloquently, but enough. He tells Atreus that being strong isn't the same as being right. He teaches him that rage doesn't make you a man, it just makes you tired. He begins to answer questions instead of dismissing them, to place his hand on his son's shoulder without flinching. And in those moments, something begins to shift. The story stops being about running from the past and starts being about rewriting it. Kratos doesn't pretend he's healed. He doesn't forgive himself. He doesn't erase who he was. But he starts showing Atreus a version of manhood that includes silence, that includes patience, that includes grief. There's a moment, subtle and easy to miss, where Kratos kneels beside a body. Not a god, not a monster, just someone who didn't survive. And he tells Atreus that death is not something to be mocked. That killing should never be casual. That every life taken stays with you. And the way Atreus looks at him changes. Because this is the first time he's being told not to fight. He's being told to feel. That's what makes Kratos' arc so quietly radical. It's not just that he changes, it's how he changes. Through restraint, through listening, through the unbearable effort it takes to stay still when everything in his body is telling him to destroy. He doesn't become perfect, but he becomes present, and that presence, unshaken, unflinching, and finally open, becomes the most powerful weapon he's ever wielded. Not to win a battle, but to break the cycle. When Ragnarok arrives, it's not with fire, not at first. It arrives with questions, with fear, with the quiet dread of a future already written into stone. The mural Atreus finds, that vision of Kratos' death, sits heavy over everything. Not because it's epic, but because it's personal. Because for once, the idea of Kratos dying doesn't feel like the end of the world. It feels like the end of a relationship. That's what's at stake now. Not just fate, not just gods, but a father and son trying to carve out one more year together before destiny comes to collect. And here's where Kratos does something that would have been unthinkable in the Greek era. He trusts. He stops trying to control Atreus. He stops pushing back against what the boy is becoming. And instead, he lets go. Just enough to say, I will follow you. That's not surrender. That's love. And that love, earned through years of silence, mistakes, and second chances, changes the ending. Kratos doesn't die. Not just because the gods spare him, but because he's not the same man the prophecy is written about. That's the quiet genius of the arc. Fate doesn't change because Kratos swings a bigger axe. It changes because he becomes someone worth saving. Someone who could lead instead of conquer. Someone who could protect without control. And when he finally sees the new mural, the one where people revere him not as a destroyer, but as a builder, it doesn't bring joy to him. It brings him disbelief. He stares at it like it's a lie, because deep down, Kratos never thought he could be remembered with peace, with reverence, with love. He always saw himself as a ghost, but now he's something else. Not a god of war, not just a father, but a man who walked through fire and ash and blood and came out the other side holding someone's hand. Not with power, but with presence. Kratos didn't save the world. He didn't rewrite history. He didn't lead an army. He didn't sacrifice himself to redeem the past. He simply stayed. Stayed with his son. Stayed with the guilt. Stayed present long enough to prove that legacy isn't something you build, it's something you choose. That's what makes Kratos' arc one of the most important in modern day gaming. Not because it's not dramatic, but because it's deliberate. It doesn't trade violence for forgiveness. It doesn't erase what came before. It carries it, quietly, with effort, with intention, but also with restraint. Because restraint is hard, especially in this medium, especially for characters like him. The old Kratos was a blueprint for a kind of protagonist we've seen 1,000 times. Rage-filled, emotionally vacant, dripping with testosterone and tragedy. That version of Kratos fit the moment. But he didn't grow. He didn't heal. He didn't ask anything of us except that we press buttons faster. But this Kratos asks us to listen, to wait, to try. He teaches us that being strong doesn't mean being loud, that masculinity doesn't need to be hollow, that fatherhood isn't about dominance, it's about presence. And knowing when to speak and when to hold your child's gaze with nothing but quiet behind your eyes is important. And when we talk about the greatest character arcs in gaming, it's tempting to rank them by what they accomplished, what they changed. But maybe the most important arcs aren't the ones that end in sacrifice. Maybe they're the ones that survive. The ones that face their worst instincts and say, no, not again, not this time. The ones that choose to become something more, not for glory and not for forgiveness, but for the people walking beside them. Kratos became more than a god. He became a guide, a man who stood at the edge of everything he'd ever done and walked backward through it, with a child at his side and the past whispering in his ear. Not because he could silence it, but because he could finally say, I'm not that man anymore.